Okay, today we're going to begin by talking about the exploration and many of the different groups that are exploring. Most of these explorers that you see on the screen right now are explorers that you will have heard about or will be covering in your presentations in the group. So I'm not going to spend time talking about them now. I don't want to spoil anybody's information that they're planning to present. And so make sure that you include those in your notes as you hear from your classmates talking about each one of those. They're going to talk about the French explorers, the Dutch, the English, but I do want to focus here on Jamestown. I don't require you to know a lot of dates in this class, but 1607 is a critical one where the English explore and bring the first permanent English settlement to the New World, and that's Jamestown, 1607. So keep in mind some of our big timeline events. 1588 was the Spanish Armada. We said that the Spanish gave up their place as the top naval group to the English when that happened. Now the English have the advantage over the Spanish, and now they're going to begin going to the New World for exploration and specifically settlement. That's going to be a key difference between the English and everybody else, is that the English are going for settlement. Then the other groups, the French were there for settlement, but they were also there looking for trade. The Dutch were looking for settlement, but they were kind of a minor player as well. The Spanish were clearly looking for gold and wealth and domination. They were not looking for settlement. The Portuguese were also looking for wealth. They were not looking to establish colonies. The English take a different approach. Their approach is colonization. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on in this lesson. So let's move ahead here to the Orient, and we look at Portugal. Again, Cabral is going to be mentioned in your presentation, so I'm going to skip over him for right now. I do want to talk about Alfonso Albuquerque. He is best known for being the governor of India as the Portuguese make their way through Africa and then up to India and create a stronghold there. He is appointed to be the governor, and he is given the credit for founding imperialism for the Portuguese. Now, imperialism is essentially the idea that one country is going to dominate the other countries because of their power and their size. Now, Portugal's not a huge country, but their navy was very strong, and other countries could not defeat them or kick them out because the navy was feared so much. So Albuquerque established that fear in the hearts of all of these port cities along Africa and then even in India where nobody else could really compete. So he played a huge role in all of that and is given the credit for being very significant for the Portuguese. Now we move on and talk about England. England was really not a major player in this part of the world. They were focusing a little bit more toward the west, but they do get involved in the east, and I say here, better late than never. They kind of wait things out, let everybody else fight it out for a while, and then England swoops in here a little bit toward the end. Their primary focus is in India, and this is where they are going to make a decent amount of wealth. They're going to establish a shipping route from England all the way to India and back and forth, where they are going to trade goods and they're going to bring those back. You may have heard of the East India Trading Company. We'll talk about them a little bit later. But they're established here to provide a source of wealth for England. As they bring those products back, people buy those products and it generates a flow in their economy. What about the people that are living there? The people out in the East? What is their approach? What is their thought on all these Westerners coming in and telling them what to do and dominating them? Well, if you are from China and Japan, you're not going to be very happy about it because you have a different way of thinking. For the most part, China and Japan have been closed off to the rest of the world. They have been content and happy with their advancement in technology. They also, right after the Black Death and the plague swept through, they closed themselves off, believing that their interaction with other groups and societies, especially from the West, may have caused some of that. And so they believed themselves to be a superior culture, and in a lot of ways, they had more technological advances than many of the Westerners. But they also had a lot to offer the West, and that's why the West wanted to be friends with them. But there's a lot of resentment because of the way that Portugal, maybe even we could throw England in there, and Spain started to treat the people from China and Japan. One of the positive things we might be able to say is Francis Xavier. Well, I say positive hesitantly because it depends on how you look at it. A couple things you need to know about Francis Xavier is that he is one of the co-founder of the Jesuits. A few brownie points here if you can remember who the other founder of the Jesuits is. I'll give you a moment to think about that. Yeah, if you got Ignatius Loyola, you'd be correct. If you sat there and did nothing, you would be incorrect. So Francis Xavier helped to found the Jesuits. Now, if you remember back to when we talked about them, their primary goal was to advance Catholicism anywhere throughout the world and to stop heresy. So Francis Xavier decided, along with Ignatius Loyola, that it was important to send out missionaries to these different parts of the world who were exploring new areas and encountering new people that probably had not heard of Christianity or the Catholic Church. Well, Francis Xavier didn't just send people out, he decided to go for himself. So he gets on a ship and he goes to India and he begins to share the message of the Catholic Church with the people in India. He builds churches. It is very successful. Now, he moves on to China and it's not quite as successful. Now, he does see a few converts there, but there's a lot more resistance in China, partially due to the fact that China saw all the influence of the West coming in and they were resistant to change. They were resistant to the Western culture and philosophy anyway. So when he brings them the idea of a new religion or a view on God, they immediately bristle at that. So once again, it depends on your perspective. If you think that sharing the gospel, sharing the Catholic version of the gospel and Christianity there is a good thing, then Francis Xavier did a lot of good for that area. If you look at it as some do, where Francis Xavier has pushed his religion and forced it on the people, then that may not be quite such a good thing. China bristles, they really don't want him there, and it turns a lot of people away from Christianity because of his influence and the influence of other Europeans there. And even to this day, it's really difficult for some people in the Chinese culture to listen to Western Christianity because of some of the history involved here. Now, let's move on here and talk about some of the impacts of exploration. It's not simply that all of these countries are going out and exploring new lands and discovering new people. That's great. They go out there, they do all that, and now they want to build wealth off of it. And there are a number of different things that happen. One of those things is a concept called mercantilism. And it's really important that we understand mercantilism. They have a primary goal here in the fact that wealth should benefit the mother country. So mercantilism is going to, let's use England as an example here. England is going to buy into mercantilism and they are going to send out all these explorers and even encourage settlement and new colonies because they know those colonies can build wealth there and send it back to the mother country. Now, we all know geography well enough to know that England is a small land, waterlocked island. They don't have a whole lot of room for expansion. There's not a lot of natural resources there in England. So they have to import all of those things. Well, it costs them money every time that they import from a country like France or Spain or India, that they have to pay somebody else for their products. However, if they can establish a colony that is owned by the British, they can then tell that colony, everything that you make, everything you profit has to come back to benefit the mother country. That's your purpose of being there. That's the goal of mercantilism, that everything that happens is going to benefit the mother country. And this is a really important concept to understanding American history. So if you plan to go on to U.S. history, you really need to understand England's philosophy behind the colonies. It was not that they wanted to provide the American dream for these colonists to go out and have their own land, have their own home. That may have been a side perk, but that was not the ultimate goal. They wanted for these colonies to go produce stuff or harvest things and send them back to England so that they could make a profit and continue dominating the world. So when it comes to the colonies that they set up, they insisted on having a favorable balance of trade. What that means is that as their as England, the mother country, is going to trade with other nations, they want to make sure they're getting the best deal. Same thing with the colonies. If they allowed the colonies to trade, which a lot of times they put restrictions on that, they wanted to make sure that it was going to be in the best interest of England. So when you make a deal, it always has to come in favor of the mother country. Production, once again, all the production that happens there benefits the mother country. So if the American colonies start to produce tobacco or they start to produce lumber, which up in New England, that was a major commodity that England did not have, they would cut down those trees, put them down into lumber, send them back to England, and England would have to pay very little for that. They essentially just had to pay the expense to keep the colonists alive. So all the production the colonists put into their work, most of it went back to England. There was often a no trade clause in the agreement for allowing the colonists to live there. So let's say that the colonists are chopping down trees up in Massachusetts, and here comes Spain, and Spain's navy has just been wiped out by the Spanish Armada a few years back, and they offer them a deal, and they say, well, what are you paying, or what is England paying you for each tree that you cut down? And let's just say they're paying them $100 for each tree. Well, when Spain comes in, they say, well, we will pay you $110 for every tree that you cut down and send them to us. Well, what is that going to do to England? Obviously, that's going to cut down on the amount of trees that they are going to get because the colonists would rather sell it for $110. So to stop that from happening, England would tell the colonists, I don't care what offer you get, you're not allowed to trade with certain countries unless we give approval. England also does not want Spain building up their navy again. So they are not going to allow you to send your wood and lumber to Spain so they can rebuild their navy. So that's an important thing to understand with that as well. For the most part, the interest of the people was ignored. It did not matter, and the people we're talking about here are the colonies. The mother country did not have a whole lot of sympathy toward those who were in the colonies. They viewed them as employees, they viewed them as workers who are on the low end of things, and so they didn't offer them a whole lot of benefits. They were still citizens, they still had the same privileges as a citizen, but when it came to the interests of the colonists, it was always put secondary to the interests of the mother country. Now, that brings us to the next idea here of capitalism, and you've probably heard of that because capitalism is what exists for the most part in the United States. So, with capitalism, the goal is that wealth should advance wealth, which means that wealth may come to the mother country, but it also may come to the individual. And those that buy into capitalism believe that the wealth of the individual will bring about wealth to the mother country as well. And the motivation here is that you as an individual could build up wealth and still benefit the mother country, and so you both win. That does not always happen. That's part of the risk of capitalism. However, it provides a bigger incentive for those who are participating in this type of economy because they have the dream that I could become wealthy one day. So the more wealth I have, the more I'm going to invest it into the government or into somebody else so I can build more wealth, and they're also going to be able to build wealth in addition to my own. A few companies were started in England as a result of this philosophy. What they would do is to join their resources together. Several people who had a decent fund of wealth would get together to form a major company in order to be able to start a colony over in the New World, or perhaps in India, or even to start a business that would transport back and forth. Clearly, there was an opportunity here, since Amazon does not exist yet, to be able to ship items back and forth between the colonists that were living in the New World and their homeland of England. So if you formed your own moving company or you formed your own trading shipping company, you were going to have business all the time. And one of those approaches was called a joint stock company. Purpose behind a joint stock company is where you have several individuals who put a little bit of money together in hopes of earning a profit. there's a whole lot less risk involved in this because you are not putting in your entire life savings into one ship or one company. And if a major storm comes, that ship sinks, everything you've invested is gone. Instead, we're going to get 100 people together and everybody's going to put in, let's just say, $1,000. And now we have the funds to start that company. And if the company fails or the ship sinks, I've only lost my $1,000. I still have money in the bank. I can go start another company. So the joint stock company is the beginnings of our modern stock investment program that you see in the New York Stock Exchange. It's also the beginnings of many corporations that we see in modern America as well. Of course, this is all England, but it's going to translate over here. One of the most famous is the English East India Company. This was a group of several people who merged their wealth together to form this company, and they traded primarily over to India, back to England, and then they would take some of those items in England and bring them over to the New World and begin distributing them to the colonists, and they would buy them. By the way, this is the same company, so we fast forward a little while, that is going to have a whole lot of extra tea in their surplus, and the King of England says, well, the people over in the colonies love tea. Let's send them some extra tea. And so they bring it over, and you should know the end of the story where all that tea ends up in the harbor, spurring one of the additional sparks leading up to the Revolutionary War. You'll hear more about that in American history next year, but this is the same company that deals with that. Every one of these companies or every one of these businesses had to have an underwriter. Now, an underwriter is somebody who is going to fund their expenses. So many of the explorers that you have researched and you are talking about, they are sponsored by an underwriter or a financer. Even today, we have underwriters in any loan that you would apply for, whether it's a car loan or a loan for a house or a college loan. They are going to look at your finances. They're going to evaluate if you are a worthwhile customer, that you are trustworthy enough to pay that back. So these underwriters were putting out the money, hoping that if the company did well, they would benefit from the profit. And that was the major goal there of capitalism. Turning the page here to a not so pleasant conversation is the Atlantic slave trade. Now, for this particular segment, John Green's got a really good video on this that I'm going to attach here, and I will put it into Canvas right below this video. And so check in the course modules in the unit videos to find this one. You can also search it up on YouTube as well. But I want you to watch this Atlantic slave trade video, and I'm going to put it into Edpuzzle so that way you can answer some questions on that. But please take notes, include this into your notes based off of some of the major points that John Green makes in his video.